Hello my dear friends, you're in the Military Summary channel, and today we will discuss the situation in Ukraine on the 26th of July of 2023. Today we have a lot of very interesting updates, so let's start. We can say that the decisive week has come, the week when the entire, probably summer campaign will be determined, whether the Russians are going to win or the Ukrainians will be able to penetrate the Russians' defense belt and to successfully counterattack and to regain their lost positions in the vicinity of Artyomovsk and, of course, in Zaporizhzhia area in the vicinity of Bradley Square. But yet, the Russians were able to repel every single Ukrainian attempt to attack on every single front lines. First, of course, we're going to start with Zaporizhzhia area, with Bradley Square, with Petykhatki area. This morning, as we discussed in the morning video of the local time, the Ukrainians launched significant offensive operation in this area, and probably that attack, that wave of attack, those waves of attack were the heaviest since the beginning of this special military operation attack by the Ukrainian forces that was implemented by the Ukrainian forces. That offensive operation started at 4 a.m. of the local time. At 5 a.m., as we discussed in the previous video, the Russians managed to calculate up to 15 armored vehicles. At 6 a.m. of the local time, the Russians started receiving the first numbers of the results of Ukraine attack, and the Russians managed to shut down at least 4 tanks. At 7 a.m., the Russians managed to destroy 5 tanks, and at 8 a.m. of the local time, the Ukrainians were completely defeated and were forced to step back. After that, there was few updates that the Ukrainians sent more and more waves, but it was very difficult to understand whether that was speculation or attempt to reduce the media effect of that greatest defeat. Very difficult to understand. At noontime and later, we started receiving more and more video and photo confirmations. During those operations, we got update that a lot of Ukrainians have already surrendered, and that Russians managed to capture around 30 Ukrainian soldiers. Furthermore, we got a very interesting piece of information that somewhere at 1 p.m. of the local time, the Ukrainians managed to enter Robotyne. So as a result of attack, the Ukrainians somehow managed to enter the edge of the settlement and even to start fightings and clashes in the first buildings in that settlement. But later, and as I understand, later somewhere at 4 p.m. and 5 p.m. we got more updates from this bridgehead, and we got the real purpose, the video of geolocated video of the real purpose of the Ukrainian attacks. So at 1 p.m. the Ukrainians entered the settlement, but that was not a real operation, not the primary operation. That was the secondary operation. The Ukrainians were trying to pin down the Russians and to force them to send all the forces they have and operational reserves to the edge positions to slow down and to repel the Ukrainians' attack. Meanwhile, the main Ukrainian forces continue advancing to the south, and according to probably one of the most famous geolocation of today, let's take a look at that geolocation. We see that the number of Ukrainian armored vehicles were left in the fields. Some sources were saying that this is already destroyed armored vehicles or something like this, but those armored vehicles, according to these videos, if you can take a look closer to this armored vehicle, weren't destroyed. They were abandoned. And the thing is that if we take a look, this video, as I understand, was geolocated. At least the sources that published that video shown us this geolocation. As you can see, one more time, one Ukrainian wave entered Robotyne, and the Russians were forced to drop some operational resources to fight with the Ukrainians. And the second wave moved further to the south with main purpose to bypass the Russians' defense belt on the eastern flank of the salient and to attack them in their back. And this is exactly the video of those armored vehicles that managed to bypass Russians' defense belt. There is 2 Bradleys and 1 T-64 tank. And as you can see, there are no explosions, and these armored vehicles are completely in normal condition. That means that Ukrainians, as soon as they got these positions, they started the storming operation of the trenches on the north, so behind the Russian positions. And as I understand, we haven't received any video or photo geolocations of that, but as I understand, based on that geolocation, the Ukrainians, as a result of today's suicide offensive operation, managed to establish control over this defense belt, this one. And Probably later those armored vehicles that were abandoned in the fields were destroyed by the Russian artillery or Lancet strikes, and I understand that soon we're going to receive more updates and more video of that. But anyway, the Ukrainians completely were defeated, obviously, but when talking about the number of losses. But when talking about the taking control of another defense belt, we see that the Ukrainians managed, no matter the price, no matter the losses, to advance and to develop at least a little bit the bridgehead. And the Russians, as I understand, were forced to step back from this defense belt to the south and to the east. So this is, for now, this is yet unconfirmed information, because it's not just important to establish control of the defense belt. It is very important to hold the positions and to repel the Russian counterattack, which obviously will take place during the 26th of July and the night of 27th of July. Furthermore, the Russians were using very interesting tactic, because during the previous waves of attacks, the Russians started attacking the Ukrainian positions using artillery and drones just in the on the territory, in the sector of midfield, somewhere in this area. But today, the Russians started bombing and shelling the Ukrainians in the vicinity of Novodanilovka, and we got very interesting video geolocated of explosions and smoke of Ukrainian forces while they were moving in the vicinity of that settlement. So basically, the Ukrainians haven't even managed to enter not just the Russians' defense belt. Some part of Ukrainian armored vehicles and equipment were destroyed at the beginning of this suicide and very bloody trip. The Ministry of Defense of Russian Federation reported that the Russians managed to repel the Ukrainians' attack, of course, of forces of 47th Mechanized Brigade, of course, of 118th Mechanized Brigade, and of course of the forces of 33rd Mechanized Brigade and probably 117th and 16th Mechanized Brigade. As a result of those clashes that took place among these fields, the Ukrainians lost at least 33 tanks, 33 armored vehicles, including 22 tanks, 10 infantry armored vehicles, and one probably infantry personal carrier or something like this. Furthermore, a lot of Ukrainian soldiers were captured, and they are currently under Russian control. They have been arrested, and currently they're giving their own situation to the investigators. So this is the situation about the Bradley Square. And today I got a very interesting joke on the Telegram channel that somebody suggested to rename the Bradley Square probably to the Bradley Town Hall, because the number of armored vehicles of Ukrainians that were destroyed in this area, probably this is a yearly production plan for some European country like United Kingdom or even maybe of United States of America. A lot of armored vehicles were destroyed in this bridgehead. Now we are moving to Petykhatki. Just a few updates from this area that we discussed in the morning video. The Ukrainians, after another reconnaissance and combat in this area, took a decision to step back, but they were attacked by the Russian drones and so on. Now we are moving to the second very interesting region of this area, to the Bradley Square. Today we also got a lot of updates. The Ukrainians made few attempts to attack Staromaiorske, and according to the geolocated videos we have currently, the Ukrainians were able to establish control over the northern part. They continue sending more and more light vehicles in this area. We haven't seen tanks in that settlement, and today we got the first geolocated video telling us and showing us the process of withdrawal positions by the Russian forces. On this video we see how the Russian forces received an order to step back, and after that they left the northern part of that settlement. And from the Ukrainian side, we got the video how the Ukrainians managed to enter the northern part of Staromaiorske. As you can see, the northern part is already reduced to ruins. The Ukrainian soldiers were doing some kind of clearing operation, and as a result of that clearing and storming operation, the Ukrainians managed to capture a lot of Russian soldiers in the northern part of Staromaiorske. So this is the progress of the Ukrainians in this area. The Russians during the day continue bombing and shelling the Ukrainian forces, Ukrainian reserves that were heading to the south. trying to slow down them as much as possible, but as we can see, that didn't help much. Of course, the Russians managed to destroy a few ammo depots, probably a few platoons or even squads were destroyed or slowed down as a result of artillery fire, but anyway, the Ukrainians continued advancing and they entered that settlement. Furthermore, the Russians published very interesting video from Prichistovka. This is very interesting because this is another logistic hub that Ukrainians use for the deployment of their forces to the Vremivka tactical bridgehead. Also, this settlement is located very close to the combat line, and this is a perfect position for the Ukrainians to accumulate their shells, munitions, rounds, and so on. The Russians managed to discover another ammo depot and destroy them during these days, during another attempt of the Ukrainian forces to attack Russian positions. The Ukrainians from their side continue using their swarm drone tactics doctrine. On this video we see how the Ukrainians were trying to destroy attack Russian tank T-72, but as you can see there is additional protection on the tank, but that protection wasn't enough to save the tank, and the tank basically was destroyed as a result of attack. Probably not as a result of drone attack, because as you can see there is a tank driver who was running. So basically, as I understand, the Ukrainians managed to damage the tank, then the tank driver left the tank, and then the Ukrainians using more drones attacked the tank from many sides and destroyed that. The Ministry of Defense, for example, today haven't provided us the number of Ukrainian losses on this front line, because the report was mainly concentrated on the Bradley Square or Bradley Town Hall, and we haven't received any numbers of Ukrainian losses on Vremivka tactical bridgehead and on Ugledar area as well. Now we are getting to Marinka front line. The Marinka have been activated one more time. The Russians started bombing or continued bombing and shelling the Ukrainian positions on the north of Novomikhailivka. This is the supply and support roads that Ukrainians were using to counter-attack Russian trenches and fortifications on the south of Marinka and the east of Pobeda. Probably the Russians managed to discover the Ukrainian movements and they attacked them using the flamethrower systems. And currently, as I understand, within the next 24-48 hours, the Russians will restart their offensive operation among these fields, and they will try to attack the stronghold that they lost during the previous week as a result of Ukrainian counter-offensive operation. Now we're moving to Krasnogorovka, and now currently this is probably the most important settlement on this bridgehead. The Russians waste a lot of time by trying to attack and establish control over the western part of Marinka. As I understand, the Russians took a decision to change their focus, and after successful operation towards the coal mines, the Russians have activated another offensive operation in direction of Krasnogorovka. And currently this city is under very heavy fire of artillery shells, of drones, and so on. Today the people from this area published a video of a lot of smokes inside of Krasnogorovka. And basically the Russians started bombing and shelling the settlement heavily. This is a very powerful stronghold of the Ukrainians. Furthermore, the Russians published very interesting video how they managed to discover the anti-tank position that Ukrainians were using to bomb and attack the Russians in the vicinity of the coal mine using their anti-tank equipment Stugna. The Russians managed to discover the Ukrainian position, and after that, using the drones, using the just FVP drone attack, they destroyed another Ukrainian position. So as you can see, the Russians are very active on this front line, and probably there is a very high chances that if the Russians continue the same way, sooner or later they will launch offensive operation and they will start clashes for this residential area to the south. This is the best bridgehead for the Russians because this area of Krasnogorovka is separated from the main town by the railroad ways, and for the Russians it is very easy to discover, to track every single movement along these railroad ways. So let's see. I remind you that the main forces who are located in the settlement are the 59th Motorized Brigade and 79th Air Assault Brigade. And I'll remind you that 79th Air Assault Brigade during the previous days made an counter-offensive operation in the direction of the coal mine, and that attack, as we understand, was repelled by the Russians. Now we're moving probably to the most interesting, also another interesting part of the combat line, to Klishchiivka. A lot of talks, a lot of speculation, a lot of rumors, a lot of different things comes from this area. Some sources are saying that Klishchiivka has already fallen. Some sources are saying that the Russians still control this settlement. Today we got one geolocation from the central part of Klishchiivka, and this is the Russian soldiers who were passing by this this small church, which confirms that this area still remains under Russian control. This is the Russian troopers, infantry. Maybe by the time I start making this video, the Russians were forced to step back, but we haven't received any geolocation about that. And currently, this settlement is under Russian control. Furthermore, the Russians continue very aggressive, probably counter-artillery duels with the Ukrainians, and today we got a lot of videos of another, for example, another destroy M77 howitzer, and some sources are saying, I'm not sure about this, but some sources are saying, at least the author of that video was saying that the Russians destroyed the howitzer M777 that was using the cluster shells that Ukrainians were using against the Russian forces in Klishchiivka. Furthermore, the Russians attacked another Ukrainian forces that were located in the forest in the vicinity of Berkhovka water reservoir. The Russians managed to capture and to turn initiative completely in their favor, and now they're trying just to hold the situation and not to allow the Ukrainians to break the situation one more time and to launch their own counter-offensive operation. Furthermore, the Russians were bombing and shelling the Ukrainian positions in the vicinity of Fyodorovka and Markova. On this video, we see how the Russians managed to destroy few artillery systems on this bridgehead by the Russian forces. Very difficult and very terrible video we got today from Dubovo-Vasilievka. Probably I will show you just a few seconds and nothing more, and on this video you can see the small cemetery of the soldiers buried in the black pockets, and probably those were the soldiers maybe of the Russian forces that the Russians lost during the battle of this bridgehead with the Ukrainian forces. Also, we got another video, a very interesting video from Artyomovsk, from the western stronghold, from the Domino, and probably from the... And as you can see, there are still a lot of buildings that the Russians can use to fight with the Ukrainians if they will take a decision to attack Russian forces. Also, the Ukrainians continue attacking the Russian positions on the southern flank in direction of Avdiivka and in direction of Kurdyumovka. Both these two settlements still remains under Russian controls, and we got today another video confirmation that Ukrainians were trying to attack the Russian tank that was running along the road between Avdiivka and the channel. And as you can see, this area is still under Russian control. Furthermore, we got another video from the Ukrainian sources how they were attacking, trying to track and attack the Russian commandos that was trying to hide in the forest. And the author of that video claims that the Ukrainians were using cluster shells to attack the Russian positions along the railroad ways. So the Ukrainians launched a small artillery preparation before the next wave of attack in direction of these two settlements. And for these purposes, also the Ukrainians continue their counter-artillery duels. And on this video, we see how the Ukrainians managed to destroy one artillery system, Grad, and at least two radars that the Russians were using for counter-artillery duels. So as you can see, the level of losses is very big. Furthermore, the Russians lost just a number of forces that were destroyed, raiders, forces, armored vehicles, and so on. So the Ukrainians tried to attack the Russian forces before the next wave or during the current wave of attack in direction of Klishchiivka and Avdiivka and Kurdyumovka. The Ministry of Defense of Russian Federation reported that as a result of fierce fightings on the front line between Donetsk and, let's say, Siversk, the Ukrainians lost 210 soldiers, 10 armored vehicles, and 8 artillery systems. As you can see, the Russians have restarted their very effective counter-artillery duels. The Ukrainians lost 2 M777 howitzers. The Ukrainians lost 3 Krab howitzers. The Ukrainians lost D-20, D-30, and M119 artillery system. As you can see, the level of losses was very heavy from the Ukrainian side. Now we are moving to the north and to the area of Siversk. Today the Russians published another video, maybe that's how they managed to destroy another crab that was included into the report of Ministry of Defense. The Ukrainians were using this crab to support and supply the Ukrainian offensive operation in direction of Razdolovka, Fyodorovka, and Veselaya. Now we are moving to Liman front line, to this area. The Ministry of Defense of Russian Federation reported that as a result of fierce fightings in this area, the Russians managed to advance and to develop their bridgehead in the vicinity of Sergeyevka. According to information we got, the Russians managed to get deeper for another 3 kilometers and to develop the bridgehead to the north and to the south for another 3 kilometers. So the Russians continue advancing. For now we got report that they managed to establish control just over Sergeyevka. According to this piece of information, we can say that the Russians haven't completed the clearing operation in Nadia and Novoyegorovka, but some sources have already reported that the Russians managed to capture those settlements. The Ukrainians continue sending more and more reserves, but their reserves are not endless. We understand this for sure. And very interesting update we got from this area. The Ukrainians, as a result probably of regrouping or something like this, were forced to redeploy 43rd Mechanized Brigade in the direction of Kupiansk front line. The Ukrainians understand the value of this bridgehead. The Ukrainians probably plan to use this brigade maybe in the vicinity of Artyomovsk or in Zaporizhzhia area, but they were forced to use their last strategical reserves, one of the last strategical reserves, on the Kupiansk and Liman front line. When talking about Kuzyamovka, the Russians also advanced in this area. To be more precise, the 7th Motorized Regiment developed offensive operations. As a result of that attack, the Russians managed to get closer to Ukrainian positions in Berestova and Stelmakhovka. The situation for the Ukrainians is critical in this area. The Ukrainians published the video how they discovered, tracked and destroyed the Russian tank in this area. So this is the only thing that we got from the Ukrainians. And it is very interesting that both sides, either the Russians and the Ukrainians, try to keep silence about this area and not to provide any piece of information at all. Just the Ministry of Defense, the only official resource source that provided us any official information was the Ministry of Defense, and during the previous 2 days, including today, they are saying about more and more advances of the Russians. The Ministry of Defense also reported that as a result of fierce fightings, the Ukrainians lost on the Liman front line 190 soldiers, including 9 armored vehicles and 5 artillery systems. And when talking about Kupiansk front line, the Ukrainians lost 135 soldiers and 8 tanks. So the level of losses is very heavy. Furthermore, the level of losses of the Ukrainians on the Kupiansk and Liman front line, and this is not a very big front line as you can see, is even higher in comparison with Donetsk front line that starts somewhere at Marinka and ends on the Siversk Donetsk. So basically the level of losses on the Kupiansk and Liman front line are higher in comparison with any other front line in the special military operation. We understand the value of clashes, we understand the level of pressure. The only thing that we don't understand is the level of progress of the Russian forces on this bridgehead. We understand the Russian plans, we understand what the Russians are planning to do, and we understand that the decisive week has come, and this week will determine everything and the end of the summer military campaign on this bridgehead. The Russians also continue bombing and shelling the Ukrainian positions along the border. For example, on this video we see how the Russians managed to discover and to attack the Ukrainian positions, the place of Ukrainian accumulation of forces. Very small stronghold, probably few Ukrainians, was discovered and was attacked by the Russian artillery system. Furthermore, we got another video how the Ukrainians send their scouts, 5 soldiers, reconnaissance team. That reconnaissance team was discovered by the Russian T-72 tank, and after that the Russian tank attacked the Ukrainian forces, and probably they were killed. At least the author of that video reported that Ukrainians lost those 5 soldiers. And another geolocated position, how the Russians managed to discover the Ukrainian forces in a small village Udi. This is like, as you can see, Ukrainian soldiers were moving on the street, and after the Russians managed to discover them, the Russians made a strike and destroyed Ukrainian forces in that settlement. As you can see, the situation is very critical. And let's finish this video with the Kherson direction. The Russians published few videos how they were bombing and shelling the Ukrainian positions along the bank of the river, and the level of losses of Ukrainians still on the high level, 40 soldiers per day. This is a very heavy level of losses when we understand that there are no combat line on the ground. just the islands and the lake, and another ammo depot or probably fuel depot was destroyed or in the vicinity of Novokakhovka, and the Russians were using guided bombs for that purposes. Maybe the Ukrainians were using these big buildings as a raiders or purpose with the raiders, but we see how probably the Russians were using guided bombs for that attack. So the situation is critical. The situation is very critical, and this week will determine everything. And we see that Ukrainians paid too big price for very small advances, and it's very difficult to understand how this part of the special military operation will end and how this situation can affect the next months and the beginning of the autumn military campaign. And that's it for today. Military Summary channel reminds you to condemn